Great. Okay. So welcome to the Franchise Company First Friday session, and it is our January 2025 First Friday, 1st of 2025. Happy New Year to everyone. And we are absolutely delighted that our guest for this week is Farrah Rose from the Franchising Centre, and the content that we're going to be talking about today is all about international franchising, to which Farrah has dedicated a significant part of her life, travelling literally north, south, east and west around the globe with a very wide variety of experiences, and has literally taken the edict of franchising across the globe. So welcome, Farrah, and over to you in terms of today's session. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year to everyone. Really delighted to be here today, and hopefully try to share a little bit of knowledge about international franchise development. Now, let's hope this works. So, no. Okay. That's weird. Did work a few minutes ago.
Yeah. I'll make you host, Farrah, and see if that makes
that would be a good idea. Yes, please. Yeah.
At the moment,
yeah,
I can't see anything. Yeah, no, it's coming. We're there.
Right, so without further ado, I believe that I've got around 40 minutes to talk a little bit more about international franchise expansion, and then we'll probably leave about 10-15 minutes for question and answer. To start off with, I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview about the scale of international franchising. As I'm not going to read line by line, if anyone wants a copy of my slides, please, by all means, let Julie or myself know, and we will be able to share these slides with you. But as you can see, international franchising is a very, very significant part of the global GDP. We have over 3 million franchise businesses around the world, creating well over 30 million jobs. Just to give you a bit of an overview about the state of franchising in Europe, you can see that the numbers are significant. We are not far behind France, Germany, funnily enough, the Netherlands for the size of the market, and Spain, and the rest of the European countries. I couldn't really share information about all the other markets, so if anybody wants more information about franchising in Australia or, I don't know, the US or whatever, please just give me a shout, because I've got all of those data. So what is the advantage of international franchising? Clearly, global and regional dominance, increase in brand equity if it's done properly. It's a much faster way of growing using local investors' capital, their local knowledge, and a network of contact. It obviously has a lot less reliance on your own human resources. And usually you will find that franchisees who've invested significant amounts of capital in purchasing the franchise and making investment in developing your concept in the market tend to show a higher commitment to success. So if the going gets tough, they'll get out of bed a few hours earlier in order to recover their investment faster. And fundamentally, when you take a look at licensing or agency or distribution agreement or some form of loose partnership, franchising in international market will give you as the franchisor much stronger level of control than other form of partner-based models. With advantages, like everything else, come a degree of disadvantage, which is a degree of loss of control, particularly as you are operating the business in a different market. You have geography, you have cultural differences, You have different mentalities, you have different sort of local variable. So controlling that kind of operation it can be a bit problematic. Just like any other type of franchise operation, it does require a different type of management style. Clearly, as we all know, all of us who are involved in franchising, we do know that the franchisees are not our employees. They're not even our joint venture partners. They do require a different kind of management because they are running their own business, but they're not in business on their own, particularly when they are taking your franchise off the ground in a market where they actually have a lot more knowledge about the local market than you would. Clearly, it will require a degree of upfront investment on your part to conduct your market research and actually adapt and modify your system and launch it in a different market. So the actual upfront investment would be, I would say, significantly higher than franchising the business domestically. Different jurisdictions will require different sets of consideration, and there will be a stronger degree of legal exposure to those risk factors that you would have to absolutely ensure that you are dealing with some very good local legal counsel. It obviously gives you a lower income stream than if you owned your own operation, but then equally, you're not really investing your own money in a different market, and you're not facing all of the various local difficulties and adaptations and investment and human resources issues, etc., etc. But a percentage of royalty that you get clearly is not the same as running your own business. And speed of reaction to change may be somewhat slower, but I guess to some degree that is very much part and parcel of the nature of franchising, because if you do want to make certain adaptation to your franchising system in another market, you would have to get the local franchisees buy-in, and implementation of some of those changes may actually at times be quite slow and painful. So let's take a look at what is the foundation for a good international franchise expansion strategy. Seriously, I don't think it's much different to domestic, but it just has more layers and more tiers. You wouldn't franchise a concept in your own domestic market if you felt that the concept wasn't stable. Okay. However, in international, we have an added consideration. Yes, the concept needs to be stable. Yes, it shouldn't be fad or fashion, but also that concept needs to travel into another market reasonably easily. So if you have to adapt your concept so much that it suits the local requirements or the local demand, you would have to ask yourself the question as to whether that market is the right market or whether actually your concept can travel into international market. And we've had many, many examples of this when franchisors change the concept in order to ensure that it sits well in Saudi Arabia or in Australia, to the degree that actually the essence of the concept is kind of strongly diluted. You do need to obviously do adequate pilot testing in your own domestic market. Getting someone who's actually launched one or two aesthetic clinics or run a few territories in child education or opened a few domiciliary service sites and then want to take it to international, it's committing suicide, basically. Put in a stronger, can't put it into a stronger term than that. So there has to be adequate pilot testing in the domestic market. You have to have the right level of track record and, really structured your operating system so well, evolved it so much, matured it so much that it can be replicated, including some of the modifications that you might have to make if you are going to enter into different markets. It absolutely requires well-capitalized franchisor. International franchise development is not cheap, it won't be easy, and it won't happen quickly. So franchisors would need to absolutely be realistic about the level of demand that international franchise expansion will put upon their resources, both financially and human resources. You absolutely have to have the appropriate strategy for development. Just because someone come knocking at your door doesn't necessarily mean that A, you are ready to go to international, two, or B, that the market is the right market, nor C, that that particular person knocking at your door is the right candidate. You would need to have to adapt your franchisee profile to the local market. The profile of a franchisee in South Africa may be somewhat different to the profile of your franchisee in the Netherlands. Not only because of the differences in the geography and structure, but also purely because you might use a different franchise model. In the Netherlands, you might use the direct franchise model. In South Africa, you might use you might use a master franchise model. So you have to absolutely be clear about the profile of the franchisee that not only suits your concept, your business, the local market, and the local cultural nuances. Again, we talk about track record here. I won't repeat that. And have a very strong franchise management culture. I don't know how many of you remember Brian Duckett, who was our former chairman at the franchising center. I remember a comment that he made to me once that actually really, really resonated and stayed with me. He said, if you ever lose your job as a franchise consultant, I suggest you apply to the UN, because it really does require that. It really does require having to understand the culture of the people in the country that you want to enter and deal with. No two cultures are the same, and I really am not trying to, patronize anyone here. I know that we're all very well-traveled executives, but it really does require a degree of adaptability, agility, flexibility, and sense of control, because you can't always adapt and adjust and be agile to the requirement of your franchisee, because otherwise everything will just go off track. So getting that balance is really, really important. So concept need to be stable and travel easily. You need to have the right resources. For those of you who are involved in product, supply of product, you absolutely need to take a look at the supply chain and ensure that the supply chain is fairly strong and stable. You have to be in a position to adapt your proposition. The chicken coating at KFC in the European market is very different to the chicken coating in KFC in South Africa. The hours of opening of a food and beverage in Hungary is very different to hours of opening and the menu items in another part of the world. That's just a couple of easy examples, but we can delve even deeper into, specific kind of industry sectors. Quite a lot of our clients tend to forget that trademark is a very, very important part of the consideration. Can your trade name and mark be registered in that market? Do your search. Make sure that, if you're taking a brand into another country, that you can actually register the trade name and mark. I used to be the European franchise manager for Burger King. That's how I started my career in international franchising. And I remember those days, we couldn't actually take Burger King into some of the Southeast Asian markets. So we had to actually change the trade name and call it Hungry Jack. Same thing applied to Marks and Spencer's in the US. So it's really, really important for you to actually do some of those research ahead of looking at a particular country to enter into. Systems and control, to what extent do you actually want? Can your system actually be implemented in another market? Do you actually have to adapt and adjust the system in order to be able to support your franchisees the long distance? To what extent would you want to maintain control over the way that the franchisee has implement your business? Sorry, I'm just admitting myself. It says Farrah Rose. Certain legal elements I'm going to touch on in a second. You would have to obviously do your legal audit before you enter into that market. In certain concepts, legal audit is hugely important, and it could actually make the difference between being able to enter into that market or not, particularly when you are dealing with elderly, vulnerable, children, delivering services that could actually be medically orientated. So taking a look at franchise laws, taking a look at industry-specific laws, taking a look at the legal and legislative environment at a very early stage is really important. Obviously, you have to choose the right market. I'm going to talk in a minute a little bit about some of the elements of the market that you do need to do some research to ensure that it's the right market for your concept and your brand. Franchisee profile we just discussed. The franchise model that actually makes sense to both parties, very important. Again, I'm going to talk about that in a second. But fundamentally, it's really, really important for you to accept that one size doesn't fit all. Okay? One particular franchise model that may be relevant to China is not necessarily going to be relevant to Germany. So for all of those interested in international franchising, if they think, well, my advisor has advised me that I should enter into a market via, multi-unit direct franchise model, that might be great for your first market, and it might be great for the markets that you closer to home, perhaps. But would that actually be relevant to different markets in different parts of the world when you are at a different part of the journey of internationalization? Choosing the right advisor, absolutely essential, not only domestically, but locally. I have spent 42 years of my life in international franchising. I have worked with 430 international brands. I have operated various brands in 63 different countries around the world, and I manage 76 franchise consultants around the world. Even I cannot claim that I can take a brand into all the various markets in the world. And trust me, this doesn't come from arrogance. Actually, it comes from humility and reality check here. No one can actually support your entry into a market as well as local advisors. It's so important for you to be able to connect with people at local level who actually understand the peculiarities and the nuances of the local market. So don't underestimate the importance of dealing with local advisors somewhere along the journey. Communication, extremely important, and I'm not just talking about linguistic, I'm talking about cultural. Putting various elements of good communication in place right from the start will absolutely save you huge amount of pain and hassle in the long run. And obviously, there has to be an element of affinity or understanding and tolerance in terms of the culture of the country that you want to enter into. And for that, really, you need to take a look at your own culture. Are you in a position to actually tolerate cultural differences in different parts of the world without allowing ego to get in and really disturb a good set of communication and relationship building and bonding with your local franchisees? These are not all hypothetical questions. These are points that, to be honest, through my journey of supporting a lot of clients to get into various markets, I have observed to be some of the foundations and some of the building block to a successful international franchise development. So I said that I would talk to you very quickly about some of the elements that you do need to consider when you want to enter into a market. So how do you do your due diligence? Again, for the benefit of time here, because I realize we're kind of 20 past 1 already, I'm not going to go through this line by line, but certain political consideration very important. I think you have to ensure that you can operate in a particular market at a political level, that there is positive government attitude. The British Embassy, the commercial office of the British Embassy in many countries around the world. I have trained a lot of the commercial advisors at the 36 British embassies and consulates around the world. So to a great extent, British Embassy representatives are quite familiar now with the essence and the structure of franchising. So get some help from them, get some help from the IT. get some help from local advisors in terms of assessing how easily can you operate from a political standpoint in another country. Some of the obvious examples, of course, is like American brands going into, North Korea and Iran. You wouldn't do that. So, these are some of the obvious ones, but there are quite a lot of countries around Central Asia, and particularly maybe some of the African countries, some of the Asian markets, Iran, Iraq. You just need to be a little bit more careful. So you do need to do some due diligence. Legal consideration, as I promised, I would cover that very, very quickly. Your ability to register your and protect your trade name and trademark. Choose a market where you can actually enforce the terms of the agreement. Don't forget that there are certain countries, including the UK, where most of our franchise agreements are written based on common law. In certain countries, those contracts, the law that obviously impact the franchise agreement is based on civil law. So a local civil law legal counsel may not necessarily understand why we draft our contract the way that we do. So you do need to get a little bit of advice from lawyers in terms of the markets that you're going to go to. Can you actually enforce the terms of your development agreement, master franchise agreement, or franchise agreement? Where you can obviously enforce non-compete post-termination, where you can deal effectively with arbitration. I noticed that we've got a couple of very high profile and eminent lawyers with us today, so I'm sure they will be able to be in a position to support you further in that. And obviously, choose countries where laws don't negatively impact your entry and the way that you would want to support your franchisee and run a successful business. Technology consideration, particularly, the majority of us now obviously tend to use technology as part of our operating systems, which we pass on to our franchisees to enable them to run the business efficiently and for us to interface with them as a franchisor should interface the franchisees. So ensure that the markets that you go to, there is prevalence of use, that there are strong existing IT platform, there is sufficient amount of local tech support, and ensure that actually whatever technology that you use in your business can actually be used by the franchisee to enable the franchisee to run a smoothless operation, and that you can interface them in order to be able to support and monitor their operation. Market selection criteria, clearly positive growth in GDP and growth in franchising sector, where franchising is obviously accepted as a way of doing business. Commercial consideration, these are fairly obvious. You wouldn't go to a market where there's no market potential. Price parity is a very, very important point. And I am not going to mention the name of probably one of the largest pizza franchisor and one of the very, very large coffee franchisor, both of whom entered into South African markets. The very first few months, they had a 1 kilometer queue because everybody was very, very curious as to what these two companies were, what was the product, what was the big hoo-ha. And a few years, actually less than a couple of years later, they both had to shut shop and get out of South Africa because price parity just did not exist. Where there is available credit system, where your product and services, if they need to be modified, that modification is actually easily handled. It's effective. It's not going to cost huge amount. It's not going to throw loads of big spanner in the work. Where you can find sufficient number of franchise candidates, where there is manageable institutional, if there are any, void in various stakeholders and support base, that those voids are manageable, where franchising culture is known and is supported by the government and the banks, and where is respected, where the entry logistic is manageable and not too difficult and too costly and too time consuming, where there is effective promotional media to promote the franchise and to promote the concept, the service, the product, the brand. and where you can easily support the franchisees. Clearly, these days, we would say that with the advancement of technology and all of these remote meetings and et cetera, you don't have to travel 28 hours to the other side of the planet. But effectively, still, it's, support is not just about you communicating with the franchisee. It's obviously getting the supply chain sorted. It's about training. It's about running audits. So it's probably easier for you to be able to do that in a shorter period of time in a region where cultural nuances is not going to significantly erode that line of support and communication. Tax and fiscal consideration, you absolutely have to bear that in mind. Currency fluctuation, very important. You have to obviously go into a market where both parties can make sufficient profit, where you would be able to repatriate your funds out of that market without the pressure or the headache of double taxation. So really important for you to talk to an international tax advisor. Where banks' views on franchising is positive and that they would be in a position to lend to the local franchisee should the local franchisee need any lending, where there is available funding for the missing middle. In a lot of markets, you might find that you can find franchisees who can invest up to about 50,000. I'm saying pound, it could be euro, it could be dollar. And then you might find some franchisees in the higher end of the scale. Obviously, they're not going to be as many as the lower investment franchisees. But if your franchise falls somewhere in the middle, sort of between 80 to 200K, just make sure that there are sufficient amount of candidates who would be able to purchase your franchise. Otherwise, you just sit in your head against the brick wall. And I can give you a lot of examples on that. If you're looking at Central Eastern Europe, if you're looking at Adriatic region, if you're looking at certain parts of Africa, the missing middle can be quite significant. So do your due diligence very, very well. I cannot emphasize that. First of all, take a look at, do you have the right level of track record in your own domestic market? Are your system fully developed and matured? Have you actually taken a close look and done a reality check on whether you are ready to go into international? And when you feel that you are, stay true to your concept. Don't change the concept so much that it actually kills the soul of the concept and it's no longer connected really perceived in the mind of investors, customers, with what made the concept great in the first instance. Go to markets where there is a strong desire for your concept as is, and not a loose interpretation of the version of what it should be. Do make modifications, but make sure that those modifications, if you have to make them, are appropriate to embrace all the cultural differences rather than negate against them. Don't think just because the concept works in your domestic market that you can drop it in another country and it's going to be accepted just the same. And I have to say, again, I can write a book about some of the examples and graveyard stories of where the franchisors had made that mistake. Be prepared for very, very different consumer habits and preferences and, buyer behavior, the way that they behave, the way that they shop, the way that they eat, the way that they educate the kids, the way that they take care of the elderly, the way that they fix the cars, whatever the case may be. Once your franchisee has opened in that particular market, that's the start of the job. That's the start of your journey. Be very, very willing to keep monitoring the performance. Be willing to make additional adjustment. Be willing to bring new services on board. Be willing to bring new products on board. Because if you don't, then you're going to find that once the franchisee has paid you a few years of royalty and nothing has changed, nothing has evolved, no improved way of operation has been introduced, no new products have been introduced, the franchisee can't actually see the point of continuing to pay the royalty and staying within your system, particularly if the franchisee hasn't actually gained a significant market share. Source locally wherever possible to keep initial and ongoing costs low for some of you who obviously are dealing with products in your franchise concepts. use a consultant based in the market with experience in that market. I think I just mentioned that to you before, how important that really is. It honestly is. I would say, I would not go as far as saying it could be the make or break of your franchise, but I think it's a very, very important point that is often missed. It's often missed partly because of naivety, maybe, that it works in Doncaster, it has to work in New Delhi. And we don't really need anybody local to, come and tell us how we need to adapt this or that and the other. And what if it doesn't work? Well, it's New Delhi, isn't it? We're just going to shut and come home. That might have been the case back in the 80s when I was working with Burger King. When I started to work with Burger King, it was Burger King's second attempt at entry into the UK. They first attempted to enter the UK and they failed miserably, and they had to pull out of the country and they had to come back again. Not many of us remember that. Not many of us even know about that. Why? Because we didn't have internet, right? We didn't have this powerful engine which makes any news viral within a few seconds. So it's really, really important for you to be very aware of getting it right. And to get it right, you would need to have the support of some local advisors. Stay abreast of changing franchise regulation in international markets. More and more countries now are introducing franchise disclosure documentation requirement where you have to register your franchise. You have to submit, pre-disclose quite a lot of information to your franchisees. And I would dare say that even if you don't have to by law, you still should, because that's the sign of an ethical, professional franchisor that provides as much information to the franchisee to enable the franchisee to make the right decision for themselves and ultimately for the franchisor in the long run. Have very strong local commercial and legal counsel in each market. Legal counsel in each market. If you're working with a good international franchise lawyer in the UK, which I'm very privileged to have done over the course of last 40 years, you will find that they would be very much on the board. They would be the ones who would be connecting you with the local legal counsel, who would keep you up to date with any changes in the local laws that may have an impact on your franchisee and the way that the concept is operated. Sorry, just have to turn this off because ensure that your fee structure makes sense. Again, honestly, on each of these items, I could run a half-a-day seminar, but in a generic way, I would say the days of entering into another market and charging them $250,000 for the privilege of having your brand without giving an awful lot is well and truly gone. It is no longer the way that it used to be 40 years ago. I think the franchise fee structure and level have to now make sense. So don't think that you will be in a position to get rich by picking up exclusivity fee and Bob's your uncle. But I dare say that I'm talking to a team who are very well aware and very professional not to view earning an income stream from the franchisee on a short-term basis. And you need to be committed to international support. It's not an overnight thing, and it will continue to put a lot of pressure on you. Clearly, the three models that we tend to use for our franchise clients are mainly master franchising for experienced franchisors, area development or direct multiple unit, multi-territorial franchise for those who are a little bit new to franchisee recruitment, franchise support. And quite a lot of our brands are taking a look at entering into a joint venture partnership with the local party and then using that as a platform to start franchising in that country. So when should you start? Is it when someone asks you? Nope. Is it when your competitors start? Maybe. Is it when you get the travel bug? Definitely not. Or is it when you feel you are running out of fund for organic growth? Definitely not. Is it when you're getting near capacity? I would say probably. Or is it when you have a clearly defined and considered strategy? Clearly, I would put my hand up and say, you got to go with the sixth one. You need to have a clear strategy for international development. So how do you do that? Well, the very first thing that you need to do really is to do a proper gap analysis on your own business. That's what I do when someone says, I want to go to international. What do I do? And I say, well, Let me come into your business, find out how you do what you do a system analysis, identify if there are any strong gaps that may prevent you from a successful rollout. What is your vision, and would international franchise development actually help you achieve your vision? The step that take you from where you are today to where you want to be is what I call strategic planning. And then we will have a proper outcome in terms of where you're going. So, major gaps. Are there any major gaps in the business that can be addressed? Are these gaps temporary or permanent? If they are temporary, what are the strategies to fill the gaps? What is a clear implementation plan to get you to go from where you are to where you want to be? If there are permanent gaps that you cannot address, what are the other growth strategy? Because if you can't fit your system and your operation within the correct franchising framework, please don't touch franchising because it's not going to work. Does it actually make sense for you to even look at international franchising? Do you have a strong transferable concept into international market? Do you have a strong track record? Is your business domestically profitable and viable? Do you have the right resources? Are your system well developed, and are your system available for adaptation? And do you have the correct franchising culture? Then we would take a look at the vision for the client. So what is the objective and what's the goal? What's the reality of available resources? What's the ability? What's the ethics in the business? What are the franchisor's intention to support and sustain the franchise growth? What is your exit strategy? Would franchising add or detract from the value of the business? Can your existing business and resources sustain that huge amount of pressure on international franchise growth? So the outcome of a gap analysis really for my client has got to be this. Can the business be franchised in international markets? Full stop. If the answer is no, why not? What are the other growth strategy? What is the impact of that growth strategy on the business? Will alternative strategy meet the client's vision? What are the timelines? And if the answer is yes, then where do we go from here? Which countries? What franchise model? What's the impact of international franchising on the business? What should be the profile of the international franchisee be? What's the preparatory work? Who does what, when, how, etc., etc. And is the client realistic about the timeline? I have someone approaching me the other day and say, I would like to open 15 new stores in 2025. Can you come and help me franchise my business in all of the European market? It was a very, very short call. Nope. So assume that we've done all of that. So where do we go from here? How do we actually market the franchise? Brokers, great stuff. Not all of them are good. This part of the franchising industry, if you can call it that, is full of potholes. Embassies, absolutely. I think the commercial offices of the British Embassy can actually act as a very good signposting tool. International directories, possibly. International investment press, maybe. Banks and international offices of the banks. That was a typo there. HSBC, Lloyds, local banks, they might be able to support you. Where are the key growth markets? Julie asked me to kind of just touch on that on the basis of the criteria that you see there. And I'm just aware of time. You have to forgive me for rushing this, but these are the areas against which we have measured the desirability of some of these key markets. So, how long will it all take? Well, really, it just depends on your own input. It could take up to 3 months to get all the strategy and the international franchise offer and the financial projections and all the documentation ready for launch. And marketing and recruitment, really, how long is a piece of string? We have had clients such as in Express, where we managed to recruit a franchisee for them within 4 months, when we've had clients who've been knocking at the door of investment for certainly over 12 months. But so in closing, what are the key failure factors based on my experience? And I have to caveat that, and it may be different to other people's experience. But the graveyard stories that I have witnessed in my 4 decades travel in international is when a client didn't have a clear strategy. They responded to someone knocking at the door. I'm not necessarily saying you should never respond to an inquiry knocking at your door. What I'm saying is you before you make it, that kind of first step, or before you make any sort of commitment, you need to make sure that you've done your homework and ensure that you, as the franchisor, are in a position to actually take that step. They've ignored the market variables. Works in the UK, gotta work in any English-speaking countries in the world, and I'm sure that we all agree that's not the right way to look at it. They've had unrealistic expectation, willy-nilly recruiting franchisees without due consideration. They have had unresolved challenges with supply. I did quite a fair bit of consulting work for the Storehouse and Mothercare, and I was in charge of international franchise development at Arcadia Group with Debenhams and all of the fashion brands. So I'm very aware of some of the challenges that, if you don't get the supply chain sorted at the early stage, can actually bring upon you. Substandard preparation, not getting enough tax advice, legal advice, commercial advice, and choosing the wrong market with the wrong franchisees. That may become my message here might become a bit repetitive. So I'm not going to go through it line by line, but I just wanted to finish the presentation by saying, ensure that your own base is secure, make sure that you have the resources. Please work with people who understand international franchise development and the pros and the cons and the benefits by defining a clear strategy, ensuring that you're ready to go. For some of you who've been at the British Franchise Association conference, you might have heard Paul Thompson of Waterbaby's speech when he actually talked about how I actually stopped him from going into international in 3 instances. The timing has got to be right. You have to have the right resources. You have to have certain degree of ability to be agile and adaptable and flexible. You have to have a very clear vision in terms of where you want to go and how you're going to get there. You have to choose your market properly. You have to grow slowly. You cannot really, fast track international franchise development, at least not in the initial stages. You have to stay in direct contact with your franchisee and not leave it in the hands of gods and just react to whenever the franchisee has got a question for you. Their expectation and your expectation has got to be realistic. Have the right management team on board. Your people who deal with international franchisees are very much they require a different set of skill than your domestic franchise managers. So please bear that in mind. And have that balanced management culture. And protect your brand. Protect your brand, protect your reputation, protect your franchisee, and protect yourself in terms of your role as a franchisor. I'm sorry, Julie, I ran 1 minute ahead of time, but I hope that just gave you a little snapshot into the international franchising journey.
It was amazing, Farrah. Thank you very much. If you could just take
I
the,
am. Yeah. Oops.
then we will open the questions to the floor from the Zoom room, and we have a number of questions in the chat. I think virtually all of them come from Simon. So Simon, I'll pass over to you. Can I ask you to ask the currency one first, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, sure. No, it's just I'm sorry if it's an area that interests me, and the opportunity to get some free advice from Farrah.
You can always ring me, Simon.
I will do. But listen, thank you very much for that. But I guess one of the biggest things I've always wanted to find out about international franchising is the repatriation of royalties, and you touched upon it, so it might not be relevant to add to it, but we're in an economic environment at the moment where the pound is very weak. You
Yes.
know, so you're going to get bitten quite badly if you're an international franchise or repatriating royalties. Is there any way of avoiding that, or is
I
it?
mean, I would say actually, obviously, talk to international tax advisors, talk to lawyers. But based on my experience, what we do tend to do is to actually introduce a ceiling on the on the currency fluctuation. So fundamentally, if it falls, we will only allow the kind of the currency fluctuation to come into some effect, because you can't say, well, that is exactly what it is. We're going to fix it at today's rate. But we actually do give a bit of a ceiling, because, as you said, and that's absolutely correct, if the pound becomes very, very weak, it significantly impacts your ultimate income stream as a franchisor. So I have seen quite a lot of franchise agreement when the lawyers would actually limit the devaluation of the currency by certain percent.
Okay, thanks. We just had a question from Helen Farrah. Helen, do you want me to basically, it says in the USA, are the legal requirements different for each state?
Yes, yes.
So
And
you're essentially kind of going into each state separately as almost as a different country.
yes,
Is that right? Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And is that the same for Europe? Is it like the EU?
Right. So let's just go back to the US. Clearly, you do have federal law, and I'm no lawyer, so please don't take what I'm saying. This is my understanding. There is such a thing as federal law, and then you have state by state law. And depending on what it is that what the concept is, there may be some very, very specific laws relevant to your concept that may not necessarily be the same in another state. So that is extremely important for you to obviously be able to talk to a legal counsel at a very early stage, to find out about franchise disclosure documentation requirement in some states, which are not required in all the states. In some of the other states, you have business exemption certificate that you do need to obviously, address. And B, to have a word, to ask them to do a degree of legal audit in terms of which state would be easier from an industry-specific laws, not franchise-specific laws, for you to enter. In terms of EU, again, please talk to lawyers. I always have to give that kind of caveat, but to the best of my knowledge, there are some laws that are European-based, and there are, depending on the concept, there may be some very industry-specific laws in Norway in Spain that may not necessarily be applicable in France, and in France that may not necessarily be applicable in another European country. But Europe, generally speaking, seems to be a lot easier in terms of variances of legal conditions. And but again, I think that's a legal question that you probably might need to point towards your legal counsel.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I mean, we're quite a way off from thinking about international expansion, but I'm just it's good just to sort of have a bit of an eye on what the challenges are by region.
Yeah. I
Thank
mean,
you.
honestly, I would say international franchise development is a very, very lucrative way of growing your business, as long as it's actually addressed with a lot of respect and a lot of, we could get burned. So let's just do this properly. Let's do it slowly. Make sure that we've got our own house in order first before reacting to an inquiry that's come knocking at our door. Doesn't mean that it's a wrong time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it does require a lot of consideration before you jump on.
Great advice. Claire, do you have a question for Farrah?
Oh, you all right?
Hi, Claire. Lovely to see
Hey, how are you? Hi everyone. Yes, had a chat before, Farah. We've used you for advice, and picking up off what we've been through before and going into international franchising. Is there a specific formula? It might be kind of like country specific, but is there a specific or a guide formula for pricing up an international franchise for an initial kind of like considering like like the charges that are going to be there for the existing company and setting up and doing everything.
Um,
You've given us parameters on this, but it was just really, is there a specific formula and is it different for each country?
Claire, can I just confirm my understanding? I'm sorry, because it's probably my signal. You cut out a couple of times. So let me just understand the question. What you're saying is that, is there a set formula for a franchisor to decide the fee that they should charge, or is there a formula for a franchisor to know what it would cost it to enter into a market? Which one?
What it would charge. So what it would charge to the franchise in the country that they were going into.
Yeah. Honestly, if I would say to you, of all the seminars that I've run on this subject, no one, and I've sat on panels at IFA and blah, 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 no one has been able to give a direct answer to that. People have tried, and I have heard all sorts of theory behind it. Normally, this is how we calculate how our clients' kind of estimated fee for entry. Clearly, you've got three different types of fee. If you're going into a market and you're giving the exclusive development right to a large country or to a large region or to a country, even the size of the Netherlands, you will charge your franchisee an exclusive development fee. Okay. If that franchisee then, say, assume we're looking at, I don't know, pizza takeaway or whatever, every time the franchisee comes to open a new unit or enter into territories that you might not have negotiated in the first place, they will pay you a store upfront fee and they will pay you royalty, or they will pay you additional territory fee. Or in territorial franchises, normally we tell our client not to charge extra for extra territories, because you sold the right to the Netherlands for X amount, and Netherlands has got X number of territories. Are you really going to be charging them more every time they want to go into another little territory? Maybe not. But when it comes to unit-based, like, bricks and mortar, normally the franchisee will then pay the franchisor store by store franchise fee and, of course, royalty and blah, 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 blahs. Now, I normally run a financial model for my clients, which actually says, what is the cost of developing the whole franchising system? Assume that this is a new franchisor going into international. Assume that it's going to cost 100 grand or 50 grand or whatever the case may be. We normally amortize a percentage of that to the first tranche of franchisees. How much will it cost you to go and find a franchisee in that country, adapt and adjust and modify your concept and your system to that market, travel, trademark registration, tax advice, IT modification, training, the whole caboodle, right? How much would that cost per country? So what's the country entry investment that you have to make? You have the country entry investment. If you're using a broker, you're going to have to pay them commission or whatever the case may be. Country entry cost, percentage amortization of setting up the whole of the international infrastructure. That'll give it'll come to, say, for argument's sake, 50, 60 grand. What's the internal rate of return on that? 20%, 30%. So we've already got the base. And then it really does depend on the desirability of the brand in the local market, the market share, the market potential, the speed of growth that you would expect the franchisee to adhere to or to agree to, the level of investment that the franchisee needs to have in order to really kind of give you the KPI and the development schedule that you're looking for. How long is the contract? Is it for 10 years or is it for 2 years? If it's for 10 years, are you going to charge the same amount as if it was for 2 years? So there's a lot of consideration. And then because of our local associate in each of these markets, we run those figures by them. They will come back and give us their feel and their view. We will then plug that figure into the projection to see what it looks like for the franchisor and for the franchisee. Because the franchisor can't get rich if the franchisee, as a result of paying those high fees, is going to have a return on invested capital of 6 years rather than 3 years. And the franchisee can't get rich if the franchisor hasn't sufficient amount of fund to support it and doesn't see the value in monetary terms of entering into that market. I'm sorry if it's taken a bit of a long time to explain this, but it's because it's such a controversial area. And I have heard so many different stories. You charge 1 cent per population. That means Burger King has got the same value as Joe Block Burgers. Not really. I've heard a lot of people say we charge half of the unit franchise fee upfront, and then every time they want to open a new unit, we only charge 50% of it. But in our case, there is no formula. But what we do is that we actually take a very, very calculated and very profound look at what that figure should look like. Ultimately, if you set it too high, you're not going to get the franchisee, or you might get the franchisee who's not going to be terribly happy.
Yeah, because they've got to get their return on investment, so it's working out what they would.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
you.
That's
Lovely
really
to see
helpful.
you, Claire.
Simon, we have time for one final question. You have your hand up.
Yeah, it's just the $64 million question, really. I mean, ever since I've been involved in franchising, when you talk about international expansion, master franchising goes in hand. But and in your options, you didn't mention direct franchising, but based on experience, the most successful UK international franchisors have done it directly.
Simon, I'm sorry, it might be a different terminology. I said master franchising, area development, which is the direct franchise. Absolutely, you're right. That is what I term as it. You give somebody the area and they develop it in a direct way. They do not sub-franchise. They do not sell sub-franchises. So it might just be a different terminology, and I apologize if that does.
Sorry. And just a very quick one. What is the easiest ball to unravel when you're looking at exiting as a franchisor to, say, a private equity business?
What is sorry, again,
when you're looking at selling a business, if you've got a master franchise, or what's the easiest ball to unravel, in terms of if you are looking to sell your business? Are the investors more keen on if you don't have so many licensees?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We've been involved in a couple of discussion with a couple of franchisors, and the one that tastes more sweet in the mouths of, if you want to exit and you want to sell the business, or if you want to get equity into the business and continue growing it, it's usually direct franchising. What I term as area development. Yeah, it's because you don't have so many master franchisees. Because as you know, you sign the sub-franchisee will sign directly with the master. The franchisor doesn't have much control over the way that the subs operate. When I was working for McDonald's, I remember having a couple of our master franchisees, particularly I remember one in Sweden, literally disappeared overnight. And we were left holding all of these babies in different cities in Sweden. So it is a lot more problematic. And of course, with master franchising, as we all know, you remove yourself one level away from the deliverer of your brand service promise to the end consumer. And normally you would find that equity partners don't tend to view that all that favorably. Doesn't mean that it's not, it's not viewed as valuable. In my opinion, if anybody is interested to look at what will happen if they wanted to sell the business, I would say have a mixture. Yeah. Just like with Paul Thompson, he had masters, he has direct, he had joint venture partnership. We took him into Canada. He actually did a pilot with Sean, who then ended up being a master franchisee. So just demonstrate potential for growth by having trialed maybe a couple of the different models. But direct franchising will absolutely add more value. Yeah.
Thank you. You're a star.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Farrah, could you you're host at the moment, so could you give...
I'm sorry. Yes, of course. I think I've just done that.
Yeah.
We good?
I think so. Yeah, we're good. Yeah. So literally to finish off quickly, time-wise, to thank Farrah again for her fabulous content today. And in terms of moving forward, our session in February is with Ed on the call today, and it's about converting more of the inquiries that we get into franchise recruitment prospects and the process that can use to that. So that'll be a good one as always with Ed. And before everyone dashes off, if you could just get your phone, scan the barcode. We literally got this system that Neil Newman's been working on, we gather. And as part of this, it will take 30 seconds. If you'd like the follow-up information from Farrah in terms of the PowerPoint presentation or just a quick telephone call or contact, there's an opportunity at the end to put a request in there, and you can literally put a request for Farrah to give you a call back. So if you'd all grab your phones out, zap the QR code, and then spend the next 30 seconds before you dash away from your desks to do whatever it is you need to do for the afternoon, completing that, that would be really appreciated. And again, just finally, thank you, Farrah, for your time and your expertise and your honesty in terms of the approach to international franchising, and really the really kind of fabulous knowledge that you've shared with us today. Thank you.
It's absolutely my pleasure, Julie. It really, really is. And please, if anybody just what I want to say is, if anyone, and I know Alan Bradley kind of put this on our social media, I really do mean it. If anybody wants to have a chat without any obligation, we are extremely, extremely willing to share knowledge, just because you're all member of the same industry that has helped me build my career, and I absolutely love and adore beyond every other career or industry that I've actually seen. So if anyone wants to have a chat about anything, please don't think, oh, we shouldn't, or, they're going to charge us a fee. We won't. We actually do a lot of sharing our knowledge without any sort of commitment, because we're all part of the same industry. And I, for one, want to see this industry grow at a much, much more rapid pace than it already has. And certainly in the last 40 years, it's grown a lot. So it's my privilege to be here today. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your attention. And thank you for all your questions.
Great. Thank you very much. And have a lovely weekend, everyone. And enjoy the weather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks now.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Farrah. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks.